looked me in the eye and said, Warren, Japanese don't know how to make luxury cars. And if there was anybody who knew how to evaluate the interior of a vehicle that I've run into in my career, is Bob Lutz. We know where you live. Well, you threatened her. We moved her to Budapest. Don't ever do that again. We were this small little secret group. He proceeded to stand up and point his finger at me for 5 minutes. I mean, we were losing our shirts. You know those stories where you hear, musicians are sitting at a bar and they get out an envelope and they write a tune that goes platinum? Right? All those stories exist. Well, I can tell you that one of those stories exists in the automobile business. Saab was in 123 countries, and they had basically 2 cars. Look to leadership if you can't make money in a $2.5 million market. This is deep secrets revealed. Okay? The response should have been, we need to take that particular position to the UAW and have a whole different approach of negotiating what we're going to be in the United States market over time. As you see the problem, you see it as clear as day. But the ability for an internal organization to come to grips with the problem and fix it is very difficult. And ultimately, external headwinds and external hurricanes come to bear if you can't do it internally. There's just too much money by taking a standard sedan and making a luxury vehicle out of it, adding $3,000 worth of cost and $10,000 worth of price. There's just too much at stake to ignore this. What makes you so right? I'm not saying I was, but I was in the car when it happened. I'm not saying I've read every car book. Some of the stuff I've told you, I've never seen.
Jeff Stearns, connected through cars. If they're bigwigs, we'll have them on the show. And yes, we'll talk about cars and everything else. Here he is now, Jeff Stearns.
Jeff Stearns, connected through cars with my dear friend Warren Browne, came to reveal deeper secrets, or more concisely, deeper secrets revealed. I'm so excited to have you back, Warren. I'm going to look at my notes, and I don't know where I want to start, but I don't know. Don't spend all the money on market research and then ignore it.
You have to go all the way back to 1984. The whole industry was facing intense fuel economy standard pressure, and I think that they were more nervous back then than they were during the announcement of the Obama standards, because this was kind of like the first time after the 2 energy crises that the government was really getting serious about high fuel economy standards. And the solution, or at least the proposed solution by engineers, was, we were going to downsize everything and make everything smaller. That was the soup du jour at the time. Engineers got a little smarter as they tried to grapple with Obama standards, but that'll be for another day. So it was all about downsizing, and the biggest fear was that they would have to downsize Cadillacs and big Buicks and big Oldsmobiles, because we were making an awful lot of money then on each one, okay? And so I had the unique position that I was not only responsible for doing the forecast of the next generation of vehicles, but they also commissioned me to do the market research. And it was the first time General Motors had actually spent $1 million on a piece of market research. That was a big deal back in 1984, right? 2 cities. We went to Dallas, Texas, and Sacramento, California. So you can imagine the logistics, the cost, hauling all of these future, fiberglass clay models around, and, getting a herd of people to come in and evaluate them, which we did. And the whole thing, from Dallas to Sacramento probably lasted about a month to get it all done, get it all organized. But one of the things that was very interesting at the time is we were having people do a little bit of test drives of new engines, and we're doing that at the Dallas airport. You could do stuff like that at that time in 1984. And I had the opportunity to park what was then the new Buick Park Avenue outside of the front of the Dallas Hilton Hotel at the airport. And I just walked across the street and just watched. Nobody stopped to look at the car. No one. It was just another car sitting in front of the airport hotel. That was the first leading indicator for me. Okay. And so that was, it didn't cost me $1 million to park that car in front of the Dallas airport. So we got it all done and we brought it all back, not to my surprise, but to the surprise of many, which I'll get into. Only 5% of the people that we surveyed, because we don't put badges on the vehicles. This is all done without badges, without hood ornaments, without anything, right? So 5% of the people in the research said that was a Cadillac. 5%. Not too many more said that they would buy the vehicle given the specifications we gave them. Now, for perspective, the total amount of sales for the vehicles at that time, for the Eldorado, the Seville, the Riviera, and the Toronado, it was round numbers, 175,000 units. And we made a lot of money on each unit. Okay, that paid the bills, right? Today, the pickups pay the bills, but then those were paying the bills. And so I took the research and basically cut the forecast in half, 75,000. Now, I'll fast forward you. It actually turned out to be worse than that. So I brought the forecast into my boss, and he says, well, you know, what is this? He says, you only got 75,000 units here. And he said, what? We got to take this to management. What rationale are we going to give them for cutting the forecast in half? And I said, well, how about the $1 million worth of market research that we just have done? He says, no, this is not going to be good. Prepare the presentation, but you can't go. You can't give it because you'll be slaughtered. He already knew you'll be slaughtered if you give this. But you can come and sit in the back. Okay. So I did that, and we're in a meeting, and what I want you to imagine is a dais with Roger Smith and Howard Carroll and Jim McDonald and probably, I don't know, whoever was the CFO at the time, right, all sitting there. And my boss puts on the presentation that I wrote for him, and no one would speak before Roger spoke. So Roger said, well, Howard, what do you think of the results? And Howard said, Roger, this is the most unprofessional piece of market research I've seen in the history of General Motors. And Roger said, are you sure you're not shooting the messenger? He said, no, Roger. Customers will get used to the car. Okay, and plus we have no choice.
You know, I don't know Roger Smith. I only know of Roger Smith and have read books by executives. And that's interesting to me that he said, are you sure you're not shooting the messenger, that he was potentially that insightful?
No, look, you got to understand, this set of vehicles, they were paying the bills. He understood that, okay? Nevertheless, they went through with the program. They didn't believe that the Japanese were ever going to make luxury cars. As a matter of fact, the head of the program at the time looked me in the eye and said, Warren, Japanese don't know how to make luxury cars, and so we don't have to worry about them.
So we're pre-Acura, we're pre-Lexus, we're pre-Infiniti. What was Sterling? English with a Acura engine or something?
This was certainly before Acura, because Deep Secrets revealed I helped Honda actually do that program when I left General Motors. Anyways, so it was very tense. It was very difficult, especially during the time. This again is like mid 1984. The program was about a year and a half away. They knew that this was going to be a disaster. Okay, and unfortunately, the customer or the respondents at the research said the car was too wide, meaning it was too wide for its length. The proportions, Lutz would say it this way: the proportions were bad. It gave the wrong impression of the proportions. Well, that being said, that wasn't going to stop Cadillac from cutting the vehicle open and making it even wider so that they could put their V8 engine in it, which made the vehicle worse. So, fast forward, sales weren't good. I think it fundamentally was one of those historical steps that put a kink in Cadillac's armor. There were many others to follow, but that was a real big kink that I observed close at hand. It was, you'd throw the Cimarron in the same category, the Cavalier, Chevrolet Cavalier that had lipstick put on it and called the Cimarron from Cadillac, which was also a disaster, or the Allante, etc. But it was the first big kink, and it really mattered. Now, that whole program and the difficulty with that program set in place a whole internal audit system inside General Motors, which I helped write a piece of it that had to do with the market research, to at least have a higher visibility of the output of market research at a much earlier stage. Okay? Because it wasn't good. Now, you fast forward to 2002, and Bob Lutz came on board and basically said, doing product programs, you got to do them from the gut, right? All that market research is BS. Car guys need to make cars. Okay. I don't necessarily agree to that. I think customers can tell you way in advance whether the proportions are good and whether there's value in what it is that they see. And clearly in the research that we did, there wasn't value. Now, on the day that he retired, Howard Carroll wrote a note to the board, which still hangs in my old boss's office in Capitola, California. And that note essentially said what we did on the 1986 EK program was probably criminal, meaning we hurt the company by doing this. This was the same guy who told Roger, the customer will just get used to it. Okay? They'll just get used to it. So what was the lesson for me? Do I believe that market research is perfect? No. But if you're going to do it, if you're going to take the time and the effort to listen and understand what the customer says, pay attention to it.
So when Howard Carroll, vice chairman at General Motors, says, don't worry, they'll get used to it. This is an old General Motors culture, really, isn't it?
I think that the folk like Mark Royce, Mary, that are there today clearly understand. And as a matter of fact, there was a piece in the news just the other day that the chief engineer said, we're going to have to demonstrate to the customer that there really is value in electric vehicles. That's our job, to explain that and why it's there. No, I think that it was the old GM. It was the GM that went bankrupt. You can trace the seeds back to, and I submit, back to that first big kink in Cadillac's armor and the hubris that said Japanese don't know how to make luxury cars, when we knew that they were already doing vehicles of that type and selling them in Japan. That was hubris. That was total hubris that ultimately they paid the price for. I wasn't really clear on the research. The research not only tested the Eldorado Seville, they also tested what was then known as the C-body cars, the Park Avenue, the 98, So it was a whole system of luxury cars that needed to be downsized in order to meet the standards. So that's why the Park Ave was there. It was a simultaneous test of both of them. Now all you got to do is do a picture of the 84 and a picture of the 86 side by side, and you'll see. What I think was that the external styling and dimensions, and the look and the brand character of the vehicle, they relied upon that so much that the features and performance of the vehicle almost took a back seat. I mean, there was nothing that dramatically new in the 86, as I recall it, that was in the 84. So here you weren't offering anything on the interior that was maybe offsetting some of the exterior shrinkage that you had to do to make those cars successful in terms of cafe standards. It hurt. And so, this morning I went back and looked at the sales just to be sure that because I did a small piece for Ward's back about 6 or 7 years ago on this. And sure enough, the sales were cut in half. It was horrible. And I said internally at the time, after I had gone overseas, etc., the press will never know this. This is why it's deep secrets revealed. But this would make the Edsel pale by comparison.
But I don't remember, riding in those cars, and I rode in a few of those cars, Cadillacs, Buicks, Oldsmobile. I was amazed by how similar in size the interior felt. So I think part of it was just an engineering problem, putting the package together with what they had at the time. When you say the CTS and XTS cars now would seem smaller than that car. Also, the EK?
In 1986, it was called the EK platform. Today, they got a whole new series of acronym. Yeah.
Okay, but the Cadillac got smaller in the late 80s or GM cars got smaller in the late 80s. They were competing with the prior size. Now, Cadillac, for example, their target's BMW.
And therefore, the package has to be tighter. The performance has to be better. The features have to be interesting, especially as we're moving into electric vehicles. I saw the Kia EV6 last night on the Emmy Awards. I don't know if you saw that. Phenomenal looking car. Looks. It's an eye grabber. And I had an opportunity to test drive a Polestar sedan, which they delivered to my house to test drive. It's a rocket ship, but the features and the look, I had an opportunity, a great opportunity to be at a couple of events with Lutz. And if there was anybody who knew how to evaluate the interior of a vehicle that I've run into in my career, is Bob Lutz. Okay, he could sit in the car, turn the dials, do the switches, point out the 9 different ugly black. He says, Warren, see, this car has 9 different blacks on the inside. It's never gonna work with luxury customers. It's not sophisticated enough. He says, turn this dial, and I'll turn that dial. See how that one feels? One was like turning one of the old Sansui tuners on a stereo system. The other was, clunk, clunk, clunk. So the whole sophistication of the vehicle in that segment has changed, and size is important, but only to the interiors, only to the people sitting in the vehicle, right? There's no longer the prestige of, I've got the longest car on the block. It's just not there. And so I think you're right. From 84 to 86, that perception of what made brand equity then hurt Cadillac. It wouldn't matter today.
So looking at your notes, here's something that you noted. Some of the share of the Detroit 2, the decline was unavoidable. competitive proliferation alone and desire for imports would have taken away at least half of it anyway. But the balance of the decline was management's responsibility.
The proliferation that was done by Acura, Infiniti, Lexus, and the proliferation that was done by the Germans, a real proliferated lineup. There was just too much choice out there, but they still shot themselves in the foot.
So, and then you'd mentioned some significant slip-ups. 86 front drive Eldo, Seville.
These were the moneymakers. I mean, the Eldorado and Seville alone sold 100,000 units, probably making, I'd guess at the time, I'm not revealing any state secrets, I guess at the time probably net 15 grand a piece. And yeah. So when you go from that to 50,000, and you probably had to give some of those units away just to sell what it was, meaning you were no longer making the margin. That double whammy, I submit to you, was the beginning of the seeds of destruction.
And then Cimarron, Allante, front drive Fleetwood, according to your notes, contributed to that. Now, it's when you mention Allante, it reminds me of a recording I have with Malcolm Bricklin. Did you know that Allante killed his Fiat? Malcolm was taking care of Fiat X19 and Spider. They were fizzling in the United States, and he got approached to take care of it, and he revitalized them and new paint jobs and dealer body and all that business, and selling like gangbuster. And eventually, Pininfarina said that, listen, I can't cancel my contract with you because that's illegal. You can hold me to it, but it is legal for me to cease production. Cadillac has contracted me to build the Allante, but not if my name's also on the side of a $12,000 car. So I'm going to cease production so that I can build the Allante. When I saw Allante, I couldn't help remembering that story. I happen to like that car.
No, Cadillac promised, and probably to Bricklin, promised 15,000 units, delivered 4. Okay.
Well, no, Bricklin got nailed. He lost Fiat, Spider next one.
Oh, so they promised Pininfarina the 15,000.
Right. So he says, I'm going to kill your Fiat business. Way too important. And of course, this was building the bodies in Italy and flying them in the United States to
hand polished by elves at Cadillac. Yes, that was the game plan. And I think, if I can extrapolate on that, that has been a little bit of Cadillac's problem. If you go back, again, I think that I'm at least above average on the strategy end of the business. You start with Allante, you drop it. You start with the XLR, which had the Corvette engine in it, then you drop it. You add the XTS and you drop it. Whereas if you go back and look at the BMW or Mercedes portfolio, while they have proliferated the heck out of their portfolio, they've kept those core models in place. One could argue that they're over proliferated, and I believe that they are, but they don't drop stuff, and anyways, that's my impression.
How about Porsche 911?
Yeah, well, there's some core stuff, but I don't think that comes anywhere close. And if you just think about it, the engineering workload, the capital workload to put a vehicle into place is enormous. And the whole point of the lesson learned was if you go out and the customers are telling you something, you better take a deep breath and listen twice. And General Motors didn't.
Well, if you're going to do the research anyway.
Well, again, there was a time in the 2000s, especially when Bob was there, Or research is for girls. Okay? Real men do cars from the gut. That isn't always true, right? I mean, I can point you 5 or 6 vehicles that were started under Lutz that no longer exist today. Chevrolet, Buick, etc. So I'm not saying it's one versus the other. We need, quote, car guys. I think Mark Royce is a great car guy. But you got to also go and find out before you spend all that capital and do all of that engineering. What does the customer think about this? And if you're getting negative feedback, you got to adjust. We didn't adjust. We couldn't take those errors and internalize them.
The advantages of zero policy and zero tolerance policy.
Yeah, well, that's I think it's a great lesson. I think that there are many companies out there today that may have a zero tolerance ethics policy. Others do not. And so I want to give the lesson learned on the advantages that I had working in Russia by working for a company that had a zero tolerance policy on anything that had to do that was unethical. And I could give you a litany of lists, but I will give you one example that existed for me in Russia. The Russian government knew that I worked for a zero tolerance company. That was a great advantage. I told you before that I drove the only white Escalade in Moscow because all the police knew, don't pull that person over because they're not going to give us any money. and throw the parts in the Baltic Sea. I'm not going to pay any. But this particular example is what I would call the coffee, donuts, and phone guys would come in once a quarter. You know them as tax authorities. I just knew them as the here come the coffee and donut group. Just give them some coffee and donuts and let them make all their overseas phone calls while they're conceivably looking for finding tax problems. And little known fact, the managing director, me, never gets thrown in jail for a tax problem. It's the chief accountant that gets thrown in jail, right? And the chief accountant has to be Russian. So they would come in and they would, that was their quarterly audit. And they would come in, and because General Motors, we may not have been the smartest company, but we kept our books, okay? And they would come in, and they would do their stuff and go, we didn't find anything. We'll be back next week. So they were back next week, had their coffee, their donuts, and their phone calls. Okay, we were all ready for them. And they would call the chief accountant in and said, we're not finding anything here. We can't go back to our bosses and tell them that we're not finding any tax problems here. And the chief accountant said, well, this is the way General Motors does business. And they said, how about we come back the next time and you just give us a little something that we can find so we can take it back. And she said, that I'm telling you right now, that's not going to happen. And they said, we know where you live. She came in and told me that. And I can't tell you who it is. I will tell you that individual is the CFO of one of the largest technology companies in the United States. I won't tell you who that is. I called that person, who happened to be the CFO of General Motors Europe at the time, and said, I've got a problem. And we moved that individual's family to Budapest. No, we said, we have a new job for you in Budapest, and we have a job for your husband, and we have schooling for your children. Are you interested in going? It was an opportunity. She's smart, one of the smartest ladies that ever worked for me. She said yes. It's okay. A month later, tax authorities came in and said, where's Miss X? Well, you threatened her. We moved her to Budapest. Don't ever do that again. This is the way that General Motors operates. Don't come in. We don't do this stuff. We're a zero tolerance company. And quite frankly, the amazing thing was that the whole European management was behind that. And I don't think that you could do that if you weren't a zero tolerance company. I teach cases at LTU where, it's a little bit of a gray area in Russia and how do you navigate around it, et cetera, et cetera. But anybody out there who's operating globally, and operating in different countries, the best thing that you can do is to institute a set of policies that every executive and every individual in the organization knows that you just don't do this. I told you before when we weren't doing this recording that, I told the customs officials, you got to understand, if you throw those parts in the Baltic and I tell my management that it was because I wouldn't pay a bribe, I'll get a promotion. I won't get hurt. I'll just get a promotion. And that just changed the tonality and the attitude of the way General Motors operated in Russia. And I think, quite frankly, the respect that we got in Russia, not only for what we did, building plants, etc., but the way that we behaved. So that's the lesson learned on, zero tolerance companies. I think if you're a global player, you have to have that standard inside. Otherwise, people get confused. When I was a mail boy, I had to deliver the Wall Street Journal and New York Times to every executive on the 14th floor. I knew them all. Ed Cole, all the characters. John DeLorean coming back from Los Angeles in his cowboy boots and his cowboy hat and all that stuff. And I did that, and then I had an opportunity to move to another group. I got my degree and moved on from being a mail boy. And along the way, I became the truck expert. At the time, let's just call this circa 1976, 1977. General Motors was a car company. Trucks, yeah, okay, we make a pickup truck and a Suburban, but we're a car company. Trucks, give it to Warren. Let him figure it out. So I became, quote, the truck expert, which got me a lot of visibility. And at that time, again, after the original energy crisis, General Motors was again looking to downsize vehicles and downsize trucks. And one of the proposals, which ended up being a great proposal by Chevrolet Engineering, was to introduce a smaller Blazer. Okay, not the big Blazer, but the little one, which is kind of where the Blazer is today in terms of the Chevrolet lineup. But back then, it wasn't the huge thing that was built off of a pickup truck like the Yukon is today, right? So it was taking something from a Yukon size and making it down to a Blazer size. And our position was that because it was four-wheel drive, because it was off-road, we ought to be able to generate the same level of volume in the small one that we got in the big one, especially given the fact that, it had increases in fuel economy. At the time we worked out at the Campbell Ewald building, we were this small little secret group working out at the Campbell Ewald building in Warren, doing all of these crazy forecasts. And one day my boss comes in, same boss, who was the messenger that was shot over the 1986 EK program years later. My boss came into my office and said, Howard Carroll wants to know about the small truck market, and you're the only one that knows it. Why don't you go downtown and tell him? I said, you're kidding me. He says, no, you got to be down there in an hour. Now, you work out the Campbell Ewald with ad people. You don't wear a suit and tie. You wear blue jeans and a T-shirt. Okay, so we adopted the approach that ad people were doing. I literally had to borrow somebody's sport coat and tie, which was at least a size and a half too big for me, and go downtown and explain to Howard Carroll what the truck market was going to do. So I walk in, and you had to get through security, and security recognized me and said, Warren, what are you doing here? I said, I have a meeting with Mr. Carroll in 5 minutes. Yeah, sure you do. Yeah, sure. He says, well, call him back. I'm late. Call back there and ask. And so Hilda Carter, who was the security at the time, the receptionist, called. And she hung up the phone and looked at me and said, we've come a long way, haven't we? Because she remembered me for being the mail boy. So I go back to, and so I sit down for a half hour in this little conference room, this little table in this conference room, and I'm explaining what's going on. And he said to me, Warren, the truck market's never going to come back. Obviously, you can tell my theme of Howard wasn't the world's best product guy. The truck market's never going to come back, and I know that you guys are going to go to the corp meeting, and you're going to propose this because Chevrolet's behind it, and apparently you guys are behind it. And I just want you to know I'm not going to support this. Do you have anything else for me? Okay? I did my piece. I did my sales piece. Now, no, he didn't buy it, but I did my piece. The best thing I could have done is say, no, sir, I don't. Thank you for taking the time to listen. We'll see you at the meeting. No. When you work till midnight inside the advertising agency, you get a little loopy. Okay, so we had to develop the rationale. Why in the heck would the market come back? And unfortunately, at the time, and I really mean this in a human way. At the time, there were boat people from Cambodia off the shores of Los Angeles trying to get to the United States, much akin to a lot of the stuff that's going on today. And when Howard said to me, well, Warren, what else you got? Because you haven't convinced me yet. I told him the Cambodian boat people story. When you sold and you're done, stop selling. He proceeded to stand up and point his finger at me for 5 minutes and lecture me that we shouldn't be making fun of underprivileged people and people that are in trouble. And this is a disgrace that any General Motors executive would ever talk like that. Jeff, when I went back to the Campbell Ewald building, I figured that I'd walk in that building and my boss would tell me, you're fired. Honest to God. The way he pointed his finger and the way he was telling me that. And so I went back and I told him, and my boss said, what the hell did you tell him that story for? He says he was fishing for other stuff. I didn't know what to say. And so here's the lesson learned. Stop selling.
You don't need to unnecessarily fill the uncomfortable silence. When you're done, you're done. If it's silence, leave it.
That, sir, is better said. That is better said.
The simplest plans are normally the best.
This is a good one. A lot of people don't know this about Rick Wagner. He arrived in Brazil in August of 1991 on the same plane as my wife. I got there a little earlier. I convinced my wife to go down to Brazil, and I told her it was only going to be for 2 years. Let's go for 2 years. Well, we ended up staying for 9, but that's not the relevant portion of the story.
And did it open with, honey, I need a favor, if I recall?
In the month that I asked my wife to do that, 9 to 5 came out as a movie. Okay, and if you remember the closing scene, Dabney Coleman is told, son, you're doing a great job. And I'm sending you down to Brazil, so we fix the operation down there too. So my wife says, this isn't like a 9 to 5 thing, is it? And I said, no. This is a great opportunity for me. And I went down there. So I was down there in February. From February to August, I think I spent a total of 30 minutes with my boss before Wagner came down. Okay. Wagner came down. At the time, we were doing a potential program with Suzuki to bring a small car into Brazil. I mean, we were losing our shirts in Brazil. We were probably we were selling 100,000 cars, maybe 150,000 cars, and we were losing our shirts, okay, which is why Wagner was sent down there. And we were doing a program with Suzuki trying to get a small car down there. And we were fairly well along. And Rick came down, said, and you know those stories where you hear, musicians are sitting at a bar and they get out an envelope and they write a tune that goes platinum, right? All those stories exist. Well, I can tell you that one of those stories exists in the automobile business, which is a deep secret revealed, okay? I'm sitting in his office. He'd been there maybe about a month, and maybe I don't have the total time correct. And he pulls out this piece of paper, and he said, look, I know we're working with Suzuki on a small car, but that's the wrong program. And I know Osama, and when we cancel the program, you and I are going to go over there together and explain to Suzuki why we can't do their program. And he really took that serious, okay, because General Motors had a relationship with Suzuki, and he didn't want, and Jack Smith at the time, who was in charge of overseas, had a relationship. And they didn't want to destroy that, but he says, here's what we're going to do. And he got out this piece of paper. And he said, cars we're going to get from Opel, and trucks we're going to get from North America. And we're going to get current on the program, and we're going to stay current. We're going to have a small car, mid car, large car. We're going to have a full-size pickup. We're going to have a Suburban, and we're going to have an S10. That's it. Go get it. That's your job. That was the plan. Okay, there wasn't no presentation to the board, etc. This is what we're going to do, because in one trip that I took with him to see Bob Stempel, who was the president of General Motors at the time, he took Rick aside, and I was there, and he said, Rick, you're on your own. I don't have any money to give you. Whatever it is that you're going to do, got to be self-funding. You got to get your own investment. It's on all you guys down there. I can't help you.
Warren, I'm sorry. You mentioned this, I remember on our original recording. When they need to get their own investment, does this mean find an investor? Does that mean issue bonds? Does this mean another round of stock? What does that mean?
Look, if you are doing an investment program in General Motors, you would put together the business case, and you would go to the executive committee to ask for approval, which means they were backing the risk, right? Whatever Bob Stempel said or not, all of our programs were in essence risk profiled by the executive committee of General Motors and the management of General Motors. No, it wasn't going out and issuing bonds. Now, I told you a little story about Turkey, where it was the case that we were looking for a private investor. Different story for a different day. But no, this is backed by, if I can be clear, the executive committee taking on the risk. What was the difference that Stempel was telling us? Don't come back with the typical General Motors program where, oops, we missed. Right? That's what he was saying implicitly, right? Versus a 1986 EK program or some other program where the business case just doesn't make sense. But we got to have something new. So make up the number so it works. Okay? So he was telling us, you're on your own. And I think Rick, I remember he took that message back and said, we're on our own, and the stuff that we're going to submit to the corp is going to be airtight. We're going to be conservative. We're going to make this thing work. Now, I had a full head of black hair in August of 1991. That wasn't the case when I left after 9 years, okay? That simple plan was the plan. And each time we did that particular investment, whether it was for the Corsa or the Astra or Vectra, the Omega was the original large car, whether it was for the S10 or the new pickup truck, full-size Silverado pickup truck, each of those were done. And I don't think any of them didn't deliver on the revenue that was promised. And I can't tell you what the number was. I'm not sure Joe Flores, who was the CFO at the time, ever really told management what the number was. We went from losing probably $100 million a year to 7 years later making almost $2 billion. But it was by saying, okay, there wasn't a lot of, let's do 19 different strategic alternatives. What's the upside? What's the downside? It was a pretty simple plan. We're going to get our cars from Opel, and we're going to get our trucks from North America. That's it. Go get it. And that was simple. And all of the work was on the execution rather than on the wringing your hands over what we're going to do. And I thought that was pretty effective. And the only other time I ever thought of that was when Chris Hill, when I was in Poland, and the MD of Poland, Chris Hill was the ambassador to the United States ambassador to Poland, and he was a war buff. And he took us to Normandy. We all went for the weekend to Normandy to tour the beaches and all the stuff. And I looked in the souvenir shop, and they were selling, here's Eisenhower's plan of the launch of D-Day. He did it all on one page, which apparently is, I guess, urban legend in the military, that he actually drew that up on one page. And when I looked at that, I actually thought of Rick's plan for Brazil, how simple it was in terms of its execution. And so that's my make it simple. Everybody will get what you're supposed to be doing.
Productivity lesson.
When I was done with the planning job in Brazil, I moved over to after sales. And I honestly, I didn't know anything about after sales. It wasn't, I didn't grow up in the aftermarket service world. It just wasn't something that I did.
Now, after sales, isn't that a European term for parts?
Parts and service, yes. Yeah. Customer care, Mr. Goodwrench, pick a General Motors term, right? After sales was kind of a European thing, you're correct, in terms of what was called. And Brazil, quite frankly, aligned itself more with the Europeans, especially because of the Opel connection on the cars, than we did necessarily aligning ourselves with North America. And plus, the head of overseas was the boss for both Europe and Brazil, right? So we used the language of international. So there were two guys that taught me a lot. One of them was Dick Baumgartner, who was an old warehousing guy. And he told me, he said, Warren, here's all you need to know about warehousing. This is probably after about 4 or 5 beers in Germany. He said, this is all you need to know about warehousing. If you have one guy on a job, you're going to get a certain level of productivity. If you add another guy to that job in the warehouse, your productivity is going to go down by 50% because they're going to end up talking to one another and they won't get their work done. He says, that's all you need to know. So when you walk through the warehouse, only thing you got to keep your eyes open for is how many two people are standing around talking to one another rather than pulling parts and putting them into bins and getting them on trucks. If you keep your eyes open and do that, you're fine. So I said, Dick, I'll remember that forever. And he said, good. And the only other Dick Baumgartner story I have is we opened up a warehouse in Sorocaba, Brazil, brand new warehouse, parts warehouse. And I invited Dick down. And he was kind of like my functional boss, but not my boss because he was in charge of warehousing for International. And I said, come on down. I'm inviting you down. And he walks in the warehouse. Opening day of the warehouse, the ribbon cutting opening. And there's a full orchestra there. And he says, what are they? I says, this is Brazil. We're going to have, he says, you're kidding me. I says, no, this is what we're going to do. And he says, I've never been to a warehouse opening ever where there's been an orchestra. I said, well, welcome to Brazil. And we got, and he lives in Jacksonville, Florida, and he's still a good friend of mine. But the other person was Bob Arndt. And I learned a lot from Bob Arndt. And here is a productivity lesson that was never, to my knowledge, implemented in General Motors, but it was the most sophisticated approach to picking parts in a warehouse that I ever ran into in all the time before I left. And I'm going to do my best to explain it. Typically in a warehouse, a person gets sent out to pick parts. And if they're good, they'll go and actually do the job that they're supposed to do. And now I'm being a little sarcastic. If they don't, they'll go way into the back of the warehouse and go to sleep. Okay. And so Bob Arndt, who came from Toyota, devised a system that was computerized And it worked as follows. You remember being in a car rental place where you had all the rental reservations in the back, and it looked like they had like 50 reservations, right? They probably still have that today in car rentals. I haven't rented a car in a while. Anyways, imagine that board at the front of a warehouse, and each of those tickets, like you have on a car rental, represents a certain level of work for a day, or for an hour, or for a half hour, okay? And then across the top were the individual's names that shift that were going to work in the warehouse. And what this thing did was it computerized all of the work so that the task, the hour task, had to be performed in 55 minutes, right? Meaning you had to work. You had to do it. No different than a car rolling down the assembly line and the workers got to put the part into the car or screw the part down in a car. This was taking that kind of tack time equivalent into a warehouse. And I sat there and I watched. This was in Jacksonville, the Jacksonville warehouse in Florida, which was a trial run that the UAW wanted a trial before it was implemented fully across General Motors. And I sat there for the whole day and watched those folks work. And at the end of the day, every one of the tickets, at the end of the shift, because I watched 2 shifts, at the end of the shift, every one of the tickets was taken. All of the stuff was loaded into bins. All the bins were loaded on the truck on time. I said, Bob, this is amazing. He said, where did you learn this? And he said, well, we were doing some of this stuff at Toyota. And when I came to GM, I thought about it a little more and I want to get this done. It's the most efficient way to pick parts because the supervisor who's sitting on the floor knows exactly whether the workload is half done, a quarter done, or 2/3 done. So he knows he's going to meet that truck schedule. And 2, it shows the people that they have a full task to do, and they're going to get they got to pull each one of those tickets to get done. And he said, and we program it so they can't lollygag around. They got to do what they got to do. And the computer knows, they had the times measured from the start of the job to the part and the distance and the time it was required to walk that distance. Very, very sophisticated system. Unfortunately, and I thought it was the equivalent to any type of lean production system that I'd ever seen at Toyota in terms of warehouse picking parts. It's a great productivity story. I don't think that system was ever implemented in General Motors, ever. And I think, and I'm speculating here, I think because it wasn't, I sensed that the UAW didn't like it. And because it was never really implemented, Bob went to, I think he's some senior executive at Ryder now. I haven't talked to him in a long, long time. But the lesson here is you don't have to do automation like they do in an Amazon warehouse in order to get the productivity to meet the schedule. This was a no automation solution to getting the parts, which is what you want. If the truck's going to leave at 6, you got to have the parts on the dock at 5. They got to load on the truck, and the truck goes. This was a non-high investment way to get the productivity out of the warehouse to be effective, and I thought it was phenomenal. And I don't talk to anybody at GM anymore. But I'd really like to know what happened to that system because it was effective. So I'm giving your.
Why do you think you said the UAW didn't like it, or you thought that maybe it was because the UAW didn't like it?
Okay, this is Deep Secrets Revealed.
Deeper.
Yeah, because Bob felt that even though there was 8 hours of work on the cards, he could get that down to if you organize the parts more effectively in the warehouse, meaning the travel times were less, right? That he could get 8 hours worth of work down to 6 hours. And the UAW was smart enough to figure that out in terms of what it meant for labor. look, it's, he said, Warren, what you're seeing today is only the prototype of the system. There is stuff that we can do to get the work out of this place. And if we implemented it in every General Motors warehouse across the globe, we would be the leaders in efficiency, guaranteed. But I don't think it was ever implemented for the reasons that I've described. The one that pains me a lot, I got to give you some background on. So this is, know the portfolio limitations of the company that you're buying before you buy it. That's kind of pedantic, right? I mean, in terms of, yes, okay. So the Wallenberg family, who owned Saab, never made a nickel on them. Best as I can tell from urban legend in the financial community, 5 years before General Motors bought Saab, Wallenberg family didn't make any money. But we were hell-bent on buying them because we were General Motors. And we could turn that baby around because of our sophisticated management techniques and our sophisticated manufacturing techniques. And we did. We bought 50% of them. Okay. After we bought 50% of them, Jack Smith came into me and said, I want you to do a market study on Saab's market potential around the globe. I thought it was kind of funny at the time, like, well, we bought them. Right. And so I did. And there's also a lesson learned there. Never pass down an assignment to an underling that the executive vice president gives you and asks you to do it directly, because you can only get yourself into trouble. And I did, but we won't go into that. So I went off, and what I learned was Saab was in 123 countries, and they had basically 2 cars.
It was a car and a van, right? Or did the van come later?
Later. They had 2 cars. They had a 900 and a 9000. And the 9000 was basically an engineering amalgamation that was a combination of Fiat's car and it was Fiat and Renault, I think. It wasn't even all theirs, the Saab heart. Okay. So I did. And I used Volvo as a proxy of the work that I did, and I won't go into the technical details. And I went through it all and basically said, what would in some of these countries where we don't belong, if Saab did 25% of what Volvo did, 25%, because the 2 biggest markets for Saab at the time was the United States and the UK. The Brits love Saabs. Okay. They had right-hand drive. The whole thing worked. And if you were in a college town, you bought a Saab in the United States. Okay. I mean, the income level of a Saab owner was higher than a Mercedes owner. Okay. In terms of income approach, etc. So I went off and I did it, and I came back to Jack and I said, you got 3 problems. You're in too many countries. Too many countries where your volume's peanuts. You're wasting your effort in peanut countries. 2, your main country of profit is the United States. And here come the Japanese, Jack. They are not going to survive when these Japanese luxury manufacturers get cranked up. It's not going to happen. And 3, they got 2 vehicles. It was like the only other time I've seen that mismanagement was in Saturn, when Saturn was expected to survive on 2 cars. Good luck. The best distribution network in the system. 2 cars. That's all they had. Okay? Saab, 2 cars. So I came back and I said, Jack, on a good day, they could sell 100,000 globally. That's it.
That was your forecast from the analytics department.
he said, "You have to send this report to Saab." I thought that was kind of funny. Like, you mean, Jack, you're not going to send him the report? No, because he was the one that got convinced to buy them. You have to send this report to Saab. So I did. And you know what they did with it? They put it in the wastebasket. Time went on. This is deeper secrets revealed. Time went on. I mean, I went off to do Brazil. Okay. This must have been 1988, 89, 89. I went off to Brazil. Never looked back to find out what the heck happened. This is what I do know. Saab continued to lose money. They never really got the portfolio that came close to competing with Volvo, let alone BMW. And we bought the other half of them. Because once we had them all, and we owned 100% of them, there was no holding us back. Then we could really fix them.
You could dominate the world at that point.
It didn't happen. Saab doesn't exist today. I don't think Saab ever made money in the whole time. Don't hold me to that, but I will bet a steak dinner that they didn't make money 8 of the 10 years that we owned them. And that's horrible. It's like, it's as plain as day. How can you think about making money when you only have 2 vehicles? And the rest of the world, especially in Europe, I mean, you're competing against Land Rover and Jaguar in the UK. You're competing against BMW and Mercedes in Germany. And you're competing against Volvo, who was a global player. Wasn't doing that well either. And we didn't do well. We could have done better. And ultimately the bankruptcy, bankruptcy fixed a lot of that stuff. So that's know what you're buying before you buy it. It's pretty simple.
But to buy it and then say, now tell us what you think it'll do. Isn't that called due diligence normally?
I didn't say that's what the business case said. Jack Smith asked me, what do you think that they're going to do? Okay. And because I was in charge of overseas forecasting at the time, and I finally got my head on right as to who was supposed to do the job and that it wasn't supposed to be delegated because he knew the political friction that existed, okay? He asked me what he thought. That I didn't say that was the business case. When you want something bad enough, you jockey the numbers and it all works, except it's got to work in the market, not on paper. So, I can be a little bit of a Monday morning quarterback on a lot of this stuff, and I'm sure to your audience I'm sounding a little bit like that, but I was in the car when it happened, and this is my view of what I think the reality is.
It may be catty. It doesn't sound catty to me. You're revealing deep secrets in General Motors.
And I stand behind them. So you want to do 2 caddies?
Definitely. But I don't get access to you all the time. I mean, this is a big deal.
Okay. I was in Brazil for 9 years. And bless his heart, Dick Nerod, who ran the region for the whole time that I was there, and quite frankly did look after me. But there was a joke inside of Brazil and in Latin America that Brazil was like Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. And all the people that went down there stayed for a heck of a lot longer. But even though that's a catty story that we behind his back, we said Dick was running Hotel California behind his back, right? But to his credit and the lesson learned, he had a continuity of people there that were there for quite some time and knew the system, knew the language, knew the culture, knew how to navigate. And I'm talking about in Colombia, in Peru, in Argentina, Chile, some very, very difficult markets. he had a team that was there for a while, and I think that was one of the things that made General Motors Latin American operations. He loved to say it, and he was right. He said, Warren, I've never had an operation that lost money, and I've never had a Latin American operation that lost money in the whole time I've been here. I don't know what those guys he would say, when you were in the bar, he'd say, I don't know what those guys in Europe or North America are doing, but we ain't losing any money here. So I'm a little pained today when I see stories about Ford leaving Brazil. That's their business. And General Motors is making, every once in a while you see little blurbs in the paper about leaving. And so the Brazilian press called me one day when I was down in Florida, but not at your place. And they called me and said, we'd like to do an interview with you. And I said, okay. So, this is how I close the interview. A lot of people are leaving, but Brazil is a 2.5 to 3 million unit market. And if you can't make money in a 2.5 to 3 million unit market, look around the globe. How many of those markets exist? Not a lot. If you can't make money in a 2.5 million unit market, you better look to the leadership that's running the company. Don't complain about the duties and the corruption and all of that stuff. Look at the leadership of the people that are running the company. That's the source of your problem, because you can't find a lot of 2.5 million unit markets in the world. Mexico isn't 2.5 million. It's 1.6. Now, they survive a lot on exports to the U.S., but I'm just talking about, you look around the globe, you can say, oh, well, Europe's a 15 million market. Yeah, that's true. But inside of Europe, there's only 4 markets that are bigger than 2.5 million. And then you have Japan, and then you have the elephant, China, and you have Canada and the U.S. But it's not like a big club. And so when I hear the whine, given that I think I am an expert on Brazil, and given I knew how much money we were making down there, I get a little pained when I hear, well, we had to leave Brazil because we couldn't make any money. It says, okay, well, Toyota, Honda, and Peugeot are still down there. Just leave it to them. They're more than happy to, and Fiat, they're more than happy to take your business. There's a caddy sector that turned into a lesson learned. Look to leadership if you can't make money in a 2.5 million market.
Right. I mean, in a 2.5 million market, there shouldn't be an excuse. It's just a bad choice. It doesn't necessarily mean bad management. It just means a bad decision was made. Own it. That's it.
Leadership is ultimately responsible, Jeff. You know that. So
they're responsible, but mistakes are also made that anyone could make. For example, when you cut the forecast in half for the new late 80s inbound Cadillac Buick Olds. I mean, you put a number out, you put your number on it, and you were still not right.
Correct. I mean, I once told Jim McDonald that we were going to be a 36% company. And he looked up from the table and said to me, Warren, you guys in central office can tear down General Motors after I leave, but not while I'm here. You know what the response should have been? This is deep secrets revealed. Okay? The response should have been, we need to take that particular position to the UAW and have a whole different approach of negotiating what we're going to be and how we're going to operate and how we're going to navigate in the United States market over time. But no, that's not what we did. We said, we're a 40% company no matter what happens. And you know what, Jeff? We were wrong. Not just me. We were wrong because we weren't a 36% company by the time we were done. We were a 25% company heading to 15.
General Motors was once a 50% company.
Or more.
I mean, what was Chevrolet at its peak?
25.
Yeah, okay.
But the point is, you see the problem. You see it as clear as day. But the ability for an internal organization to come to grips with the problem and fix it is very difficult. And ultimately, external headwinds and external hurricanes come to bear if you can't do it internally. Ultimately, that's what happens. And that's what happened at General Motors. Okay, rear-wheel drive minivans. This is catty.
Is this the finale of cattiness?
No, I got lots of catty, but
okay.
we did all the research. We did all the research on the new GM Astro Safari that was going to come out. Okay. And we did it in Chicago, and we did it in Fort Worth, and I think we went back again to Dallas, tested it. And basically there were two camps. There was the camp that came from cars, station wagons and sedans, that were more acclimated to going to a front-wheel drive type of entry. We had a Chrysler Proxy as a choice that you could make inside of the study. And then we had the Astro rear-wheel drive General Motors. We didn't call it Astro. I mean, you don't put brands or anything on the vehicles when you test them. And found that that particular type of vehicle was more acclimated to regular van customers and regular pickup customers, right? So you had two camps, those that seemed to gravitate towards a rear-wheel drive and those that seemed to gravitate towards a front-wheel drive. And here we have, God, I'm going to sound like I'm picking on them. Here we have another presentation in front of Howard Carroll. I was in the car. I was in the car when it happened. Okay. And we give him, he says, I'm very nervous about diversions. That's what we call them. Diversions coming from passenger cars. Oh, it seems a whole lot. It seems a lot of risk. Chrysler had not launched yet. Okay? No. They had not launched yet. This was the design staff built, they had suspicions of what Chrysler was doing. And they had built literally, it was pretty close to the Chrysler prototype, Chrysler minivan that we went out and tested. He says, all that stuff that you're showing me, that the volume would come from station wagons and cars, that seems like awful high risk to me. It's a lot easier to understand how big van buyers and big pickup buyers may go to the Astro and the Safari. Plus, I want rear-wheel drive because my daughter likes rear-wheel drive. End of meeting. General Motors did the rear-wheel drive. And the rest is history. We got slaughtered.
And did you get slaughtered because of the driving characteristics of rear versus front, or because of the cost difference of needing to go to rear? Attractiveness
of the product. We had less diversions from station wagon and sedan buyers. The volume was less, right? So it was all about what's the potential. We ultimately built the plant in Wilmington, Delaware. And the only smart thing that we did is we capped it at, I think, 175,000 units. And Chrysler went on to sell upwards of 300, 350, 375,000 units. Because the sedan, as the research indicated, the sedan and station wagon owners were more acclimated to that driving configuration. Remember, there was a movement towards front-wheel drive cars at the time, right? Not just from General Motors, from everybody other than the Germans.
I always saw that as a negative. So, I thought that was a movement that the manufacturers went to so they could put the whole running gear, the whole powertrain in as one unit. For example, in that era, let's talk about late 80s, early 90s, I liked Crown Vic, Grand Marquis, Lincoln Town Car rear drive. I didn't like when Lincoln Continental went to front drive. Taurus was okay. And the General Motors cars and Chryslers were going to front drive. I thought that it just felt like cost cutting to me. Was I wrong?
Well, cost cutting, the ability to downsize was easier. The leg room was better, although we stuck a console in the middle of it, so we mitigated most of the leg room advantage of the front wheel drive by putting a huge console between the two seats. You did not, and we did not. We did not. So it was cost, fuel economy, downsizing was easier, etc. You could be an apologist and say that most of the decisions were in a response to the CAFE standards. And you would be right, but execution is everything. And recognition. Every senior planner in General Motors knew that the Japanese were coming with luxury vehicles. This was not a shock.
This is a common theme throughout today's session that we're having. Japanese were coming with these cars.
The theme is, I mean, one of the guys even traced it from, they started out with motorcycles, then they made these little cars, and then they made a Honda Civic, then they made a Honda Accord, and then they made a Honda Accord bigger. Now, let's just connect all of those dots and see where they're heading. They said that they're going to come, and there was a thing called a Nissan Leopard and a Toyota Crown, I think was the name of the vehicle, that were kind of like upmarket vehicles in Japan. And the conclusion of the study was there's just too much money by taking a standard sedan and making a luxury vehicle out of it, adding $3,000 worth of cost and $10,000 worth of price. There's just too much at stake to ignore this. And the guys that did that original study were correct. I saw it firsthand when I left General Motors and went to consult for Honda. And Honda was a different company than all the others. All the others would give you their product plan and say, tell us what the volumes ought to be. This is circa 1985, Los Angeles, California. Honda would come in and say, here's a blank piece of paper. Tell us what our upmarket vehicles should be. Tell us what the price is, and come back in a month. At the time, I didn't know that they were asking us about Acura. That's what they were asking us about. So we went off and we did our study, drastically undershot the volume. Drastic. Okay, came back, and here's how Honda operated. We gave our presentation, we gave it the rationale, and they said, thank you very much, you can leave now. So we never got to hear what they were thinking. But they gave us a check on the way out. Little different than how the others paid, right? So anyways, it was shortly after that when I realized when I looked back that, by God, those initial people in General Motors who did that initial study that the luxuries are coming from the Japanese, they were right. And now I realize what Honda was asking us to work on. That was going on. I'm sure that was going on at Toyota. Toyota wasn't a customer of mine. I'm sure Nissan was. I'm sure that was going on at Toyota and Nissan at the same time. It's the ignoring of some strategic things and the ability to react to them that I think it was missed. That's all.
And maybe I'm off track here. They knew Acura was coming. Why do you think they named it Acura or gave it a different division in the United States, but not in Japan?
I can only speculate, and that was because they read Alfred Sloan's book, My Years with General Motors, and basically he laid out the strategic plan for all automotive companies to come to the United States, which was try to get a car for every person purpose, and the best thing that you can do is to go up market and get more profit. Pontiac, Buick, Oldsmobile, Cadillac, rather than trying to make some type of up trim of your mainstream model. That's why I think that they came out with Acura and Infiniti and Lexus. I mean, truth be told, when General Motors had an Astra in Europe and they made a Vectra off of the same, quote, platform, they had the same cost structure in the upmarket car as they had in the Astra. Only the Vectra cost $4,000 more, right? So it's all of the approach to how do we strategize our portfolio to ensure that it's recognized as a different brand with different brand characteristics that we can charge a premium for.
I was just thinking that in Japan, pay attention to American culture. You know, they like Levi's jeans and Marlboro cigarettes and MTV, and they're class conscious for sure.
Gucci, Louis Vuitton, the whole.
Yeah, and it's just interesting to me that they don't put a luxury brand label on for the same reasons in Japan they would do here. I didn't know if you knew.
I speculated. There are some lessons here, irrespective of the management, irrespective of the company. There's some lessons here, and the only thing that I will close with that. Well, Warren, what makes you so right? I'm not saying I was, but I was in the car when it happened. But honestly, I'm not saying I've read every car book. Some of the stuff I've told you, I've never seen. In
the biographies or the tell-alls or the whatever.
In the Alex Taylor books on, 60 to 0 and, the bankruptcy books, etc. You know why? Because nobody wants to talk about it. 2, it's history. That's why I like the lessons learned here. And 3, there was a select group in the car when it happened. And I just happened to be lucky to be one of them. I want to tell you the Dick Worthland story. It is, I'm going to get this right. It's 1986. And Bob O'Connell was the head of planning at the time. And O'Connell was actually the guy who brought me back, to General Motors after I'd quit. And Dick Worthland was in town to explain to O'Connell and the rest of the planning community inside of General Motors how to do target marketing at a political level, meaning at a very, very local level. Okay. And use that methodology to understand how you would do ad campaigns, how you would do dealer promotional activities, etc. So he was taking the realm of what he knew in politics and trying to give us some examples of what to do for running the vehicle business. It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And we're in a conference room, buried in the bowels of the General Motors building somewhere. And the phone's ringing. And it's continuing to ring. We didn't have cell phones then, okay. Spoiler alert. And O'Connell said, would somebody pick up the damn phone? And I remember it. It was hanging on a wall. So one of the minions got up. It wasn't me. I was a minion. Got up. Picked up the phone and said, Mr. Worthland, it's the White House. Dick got on the phone. Remember who was the president at the time? Ronald Reagan. It's the White House. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. I'll be there at 6 o'clock. The Space Shuttle had just blown up. And Reagan called Worthland to write the speech that he gave that night on the way back on the airplane. I remember it. This phone's ringing, and O'Connell, who is no shy individual, is, God damn it, will somebody answer that phone? It's the White House. And so he was on a plane back to Washington, and that night when you sat in front of your TV set and watched Reagan deliver that speech was written by Dick Worthland. And that was like being a part of history.
This has been Jeff Stearns, Connected Through Cars.